Okay, I've been building a little tool lately, something that I've wanted for a while, and I didn't really know what shape it would take. Until a couple of days ago, I think I just nailed exactly what I want. And I've come out with one lesson that I've known for years and years and years, but it's really honed it and drilled it into my skull now. And that is keep it simple, stupid. So this tool that I built, it's basically just a code formatter. You give it a file or a folder and it will go over everything and it will, format the code for you in a certain way. But the thing is, it's not opinionated and it's completely language agnostic. So it doesn't really have knowledge of HTML per se, or PHP, or Python, or Golang, or JSON, or anything else, but it will work with those languages. And I was struggling for so long to figure out exactly how I wanted this to be. And then I realized you can just do like a JSON config file with a list of regexes of starting and ending tags and just figure it out from there. And it took me a long time to come up with this interface, but it's so simple. And the code that runs it behind the scenes is so simple as well. And here I was thinking that I might need to build a really complex tokenizer or something that could parse any kind of file in any kind of way, but actually a for loop and some regex and a little bit of context that's kept is all you really need. Now, of course, if you wanted something a little bit more complex, then yeah, this tool isn't going to be very good for you. You're going to want something like Prettier or PHP CS Fixer or Go Format or some other tool that's like got a lot more knowledge in depth of the programming language you're working with. But if you're working with a language that doesn't have a good tool like that already, wow, you got the simple interface. You just set up a couple of regexes or even just basic strings to match, and it'll work. So, for example, you have like an opening parentheses and a closing parentheses as a starting and ending like tags. Anything that's between those on a separate line is going to get indented by whatever you've configured the indentation to be. It's really, really simple and really, really dumb, but it works really well. And this isn't the first time that we've seen stuff like this happen either. I think the biggest example of recent years that I can think of that really, really proved a concept is Tailwind CSS and how it used Purge CSS under the hood. Nowadays, Tailwind CSS is, I wouldn't say complex, but it's a lot more complex than it used to be back in the day. Now there's like a whole Rust toolchain and JavaScript toolchain as well, and like it all interacts with each other and reads your entire code base and figures out all these complex things. But back in the day, when Tailwind 1 was out, the way that it would work is so dumb and beautiful that I love it. It would generate every single class that it could. So it generate padding 1, padding 2, padding 3, padding 4, all the way up to padding 128 or whatever the max was at the time. You didn't have arbitrary values, you just had these hard coded things. And even if you weren't using any of these in your code base, it would generate all of these into a CSS file, the compiled CSS file. But how it kept it small is it then ran purge CSS afterwards. And purge CSS just went through that file and then deleted anything that wasn't actually being referenced in your code base. So Tailwind managed to build this enormous file that would sometimes be 10 megabytes big, but then in the end, you'd only get something that's a few hundred kilobytes at max. It's this kind of mindset that is so astonishing to me because obviously that was maybe an inefficient process. It resulted in huge files. It was really difficult to reason about sometimes if you were trying to do very complex things. But boy, was it simple. All you had to really know was, hey, Tailwind CSS is going to make everything for you. Purge CSS is going to come along and get rid of the stuff you don't need. And at the end of the day, you just have all the CSS for your project. And that worked for years. It was such a simple solution, but it got Tailwind off the ground out of a beta into getting, hundreds of thousands in revenue from the different products they were starting to release through the Tailwind brand. And it managed to give them the ability to later, after they've proven the concept, to be able to go back and say, hey, enough people are using this. Maybe we should revisit how this works and build our own compiler that's going to be more performant and only generate the classes that we need in the first place and not just everything. And Years later, they went and they did that. And in the process, they managed to bring so many more complex but really nice features like arbitrary classes and automatic variants and stuff like that. And at work, we've had a similar thing that's been on my mind lately as well. A couple of years ago, we introduced the idea of live blogs. So an editor in the CMS would go and, you know, add something to a post or add an additional post to a live blog, and then that would end up being reflected on the front end for the user in almost real time so that they would see the post come in on the page. And there were some really, really complex suggestions. But you know what we did for the very first pass? It was a single line of code in the HTML of the page. Something you might not even be aware of is a bit of a holdover from the old style of the web is you can add a meta tag that causes the page to automatically refresh on an interval. So all we did was we set it to automatically refresh every 60 seconds. Pretty dumb. A single line of code. But you know, the browser is pretty smart. The browser remembers exactly where you were, like your scroll depth on a page after a refresh. So after the page does refresh, it takes you back down to where you were before, and you don't really lose your place unless, of course, a lot of posts had come in the last 60 seconds. But yeah, it was a single line of code, and we managed to roll with that for a very long time. Until, of course, we need something a little bit better, a little bit more robust. And so someone was suggesting, hey, let's have a server sent event driven thing. It's obviously the ideal solution because you can only send events and get your client to update when there actually was a change on the back end. But the amount of architecture that needs to be involved in making sure you can handle server sent events at scale, making sure it's transitioning through different parts of the platform and being served from maybe a private environment, connecting to a user on the public web. I mean, let me just tell you, it's a lot more complex than one single line of code in your HTML. But again, there's a bit of a stopgap you can do. Maybe we want to go to the server-sent event-driven solution eventually, but in the meantime, let's just change out that one line of HTML to, maybe 50 lines of JavaScript that makes an AJAX call and injects it back on the page. And that way, the user doesn't have to refresh the entire page. They keep more context. We can do a little bit more like giving them a notification that, hey, there's a new post come in, and give them a little button to click to scroll to it and scroll it into view. And of course, we can do that with a server-sent event-driven one as well, but there's a bit of a shift between going from one line of code to 50 lines of code to what might be thousands of lines of code over multiple different applications and projects. So yeah, all of these things, you don't need to build something that's really, really complex, especially to prove a proof of concept or just to get something out there. It doesn't even have to be a proof of concept. It can just be to get it out there so you can iterate later down the line. But simple software like this is so easy to understand, so easy to maintain, so easy to iterate on and make improvements on. So yeah, why start with something complex if you can just start with something that is really, really dumb? Keep it simple, stupid.